Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in on our live stream. My name is Brian Leib, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Iranian Americans for Liberty. And today I will be moderating our panel discussion sponsored by the Center for Security Policy and the Iranian Americans for Liberty. Before we get started, I'd like to ask the Chief Operating Officer of the Conservative Partnership Institute, Wesley Denton, to come up here to provide some brief welcoming remarks.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for being here. Welcome to the Conservative Partnership Institute. We're very pleased to host this great event. And we started 4 years with the goal to support and help build the conservative movement, and do that through training and equipping those on Capitol Hill and building coalitions with partners who are allied with us in the goal to advance liberty and conservative principles. We're very thankful to have Brian and Iranians for Liberty here working with us, a great partner for not just the work that we're doing here in the U.S., but expanding liberty around the world in such an important topic and time. And we're really pleased to have our distinguished guests here today, and hope that you all learned something from this event. And if you ever need anything with the Conservative Partnership Institute, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can find us at cpi.org, and we're here to serve and support the movement. So thank you.
Wesley, thank you for providing those opening remarks. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to say thank you and welcome to some of the VIPs that are in attendance today. Many have traveled from a long way to be here with us. First, it's my honor to welcome IAL's Board President, Dr. Daniel Jafari, and also our board member, Dr. Sherwan Fashandi, and another advisory board member, Mohammed Jahan Parvar. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Would also like to welcome Fred Fleitz, who is the CEO and President of CSP. Fred, thank you for being here. Thank you for your partnership on this event. Thank you very much. And I would also like to welcome the former U.S. Ambassador to the Netherlands, and you'll probably be surprised to know a little bit of Dutch. So I'll say dank u wel, Peter Hoekstra, for being here. Thank you very much. So at this time, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce today's panelists for our discussion. If you wouldn't mind holding your applause until after I do all the introductions. First, we have Congresswoman Claudia Tenney from New York. The Congresswoman represents New York's 22nd Congressional District. She serves on the House Small Business Committee and the very prestigious House Foreign Affairs Committee. Next, we have Victoria Coates. Victoria is a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy, and she is a former Deputy National Security Advisor on the National Security Council. Next up is Marshall Billingsley. Marshall is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and a former Assistant Secretary for Terror Financing at the United States Department of Treasury. Last and certainly not least, we have Simone Ledeen. Simone is a visiting fellow at the National Security Institute at Scalia Law School at George Mason University, and she is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, and thank you for being here today. So at this time, I'd like to give each of our panelists the opportunity to provide brief opening remarks before we begin. Panelists, if you could please keep your remarks to around 2.5 minutes for interest of time. And we're going to start with Congresswoman Tenney. Congresswoman, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to Iranians for Americans for Liberty. I am honored to be here and grateful to work with you, and thank you to our hosts as well, and for all of you for attending. This is, truly a difficult time in our country, obviously with what's in the aftermath of Afghanistan and seeing what's happening before our committees. But obviously we're looking at the specter of the Biden administration looking to go back into the failed Iran nuclear deal, and that's something that is overlooking us right now. And we also have a new extremist president in Iran to replace the former, I put moderate in quotes, but this is also a problem as we look to the future and the weakness that is being projected by the Biden administration, which I think is going to be problematic in the future. It's obviously proving problematic now, as Iran is not being kept in check because they see that there is no real deterrence, that we don't really have any interest other than getting back into this deal without really exacting any kind of reforms or any kind of deterrence on the part of the Iranians and their quest to continue to move throughout the Middle East and push their brand of extremism, and also their willingness to assist terrorist organizations around the region, and their interest in disrupting what we had created and what I would say these great service people who served the Trump administration had done to finally find something, a path, an unusual path to the Middle East that ended up working, and many of our partners, whether it's through the Abraham Accords and other normalization agreements, have now been able to see, actually for the first time in my lifetime, some hope for peace in the Middle East. So we are hoping that we can continue these dialogues. I know Brian and I work together on a lot of things. He keeps up with me on Twitter. And we are trying to definitely influence the administration to move out of this weak posture that it has. We are very concerned, and we're going to continue to be watching this on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I've done a number of initiatives on the Foreign Affairs Committee to try to deter the aggressive behavior on the part of the new regime. And so we're hoping in the future that we can continue to make get some common sense into the administration and also with our Secretary of State who claims he's going to be working with us on expanding the Abraham Accords according to testimony in my committee. But with that, I just want to say thanks again and look forward to the conversation. And I apologize if I have to run out briefly here, but we do have votes that have been called on the Hill. So thank you so much. I appreciate all of your support.
Congresswoman, thank you for those opening remarks. Next, let's go to Victoria, you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Congresswoman Tenney, for joining us today, and Fred, thank you for the support from CSP for this event, and Brian for your partnership. This is a great group, and obviously my former colleagues and partners in crime, and it's always a pleasure to visit with you. And Congresswoman Tenney, I just wanted to thank you particularly for your initiative on the Iron Dome funding and the resolution on that issue. I think that is a very important aspect of the Iranian terrorism we'll discuss today, because that is the first line of defense against it. President Joe Biden's administration view themselves as experienced foreign policy realists who deal with the hand they've been dealt, by which they appear to mean that they deal with every ruthless dictator or authoritarian regime from Beijing to Tehran without making any attempt to impose standards of behavior on them. The current Iranian regime is a case in point. The administration is so desperate to lure them back into the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that they are creating a fantasy of what they wish the regime would be rather than recognizing them for what they are. In this fantasy, Iranian leadership are also realists who will deal with us in good faith to get back into the deal so they can rejoin the international community. Of course, in actual reality, the Iranian regime is no such thing. One of the greatest moments of clarity that we had during the Trump administration was when we shifted from understanding the regime as the world's leading state sponsors of terrorism to being actual practitioners of terrorism themselves. A clarity that led to two of our key achievements in this portfolio, which were the designation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, as a foreign terrorist organization, and the elimination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC's Quds Force. Here's why the distinction is important. The Iranian regime is certainly a leading state sponsor of terrorism and routinely deploys terrorist proxies from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthi in Yemen to expand their power through the deliberate use of violence against defenseless civilians. But what sets the Iranian regime apart is their willingness to use the official elements of their government, from the IRGC to their own Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to engage in terrorism. We saw this clearly in February of this year when an Iranian diplomat who had been stationed in Vienna was convicted by a Belgian court of plotting to bomb an Iranian opposition rally in Paris in the summer of 2018, when, ironically, former Secretary of State John Kerry was having secret meetings with his counterpart, Javad Zarif, to try to keep the JCPOA on life support. And Zarif was, of course, the terrorist's boss, directing him to execute the plot at this time. This case illustrates the grim reality of the Iranian regime, which has only become grimmer since the selection of Ibrahim Raisi as Iran's new president this summer, which is what we'll be discussing today. Raisi, who is the supreme leader's chosen enforcer, has a long history of deploying coercive violence against Iranian civilians to maintain his master's power. The Biden administration, like the Obama administration before them, appear to be compartmentalizing this unpleasantness, lest it impede their directive to re-enter the JCPOA. But in the event they finally do gather diplomats around a table in Vienna, they would do well to remember that the very folks sitting across that table from them may be plotting some fresh terrorist attack on Paris, or perhaps even somewhere closer to home. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for those opening remarks and powerful remarks, albeit. Let's go to Simone next for your opening remarks, please.
No problem. No pressure following that whatsoever. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with these distinguished guests today. Taking sort of a different tack, given that my background is really on the defense side, I'd like to highlight a bit what we've been doing and kind of what our approach has been until now. So for many years following the September 11th attacks, our core interests in the Middle East were focused on ensuring that the region was not a safe haven for terrorists, ensuring the region was not dominated by any power hostile to the United States, and ensuring our efforts and those of our partners and allies contributed to a stable global energy market. For the Defense Department, this translated into a focus on maintaining freedom of navigation, preventing nuclear proliferation, and stopping the emergence of terrorist safe havens. These were the shared goals of not just the United States, but many international partners. As this crowd is well aware, Iran opposed these shared goals. Iran sowed instability across the region to increase its influence. Iran proliferated advanced conventional weapons to undermine the security of our regional partners. Iran advanced its nuclear capabilities. Iran escalated its reckless campaign of violence, attacking the coalition presence in Iraq, oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, and international shipping in the Gulf. The Defense Department did not routinely respond to provocative Iranian actions, frustrating many, instead focusing on efforts to help its partners address Iranian destabilizing activities in what they called an interoperable manner, both with the United States and with their neighbors. One, what I believe important multinational effort was focused on improving air defenses in the Arabian Peninsula in the aftermath of Iran's attacks on oil refineries in 2019. Another has been work with the Gulf Collaboration Council partners to address shared early warning systems. Given the complex nature of the Iranian threat, multilateral cooperation has historically been key. Another focus area to counter Iran prior to the Biden administration was military posture. We have had bases and partnerships throughout the region operating across domains that limited Iran's freedom of maneuver, deterred aggression, and reassured allies and partners. While specific forces deployed at these bases fluctuated according to global requirements, the military and previous administrations maintained the option and the ability to rapidly flow in capabilities as needed to respond to an emerging threat, most recently evidenced in the extraordinary period following the strike against Qasem Soleimani. Now, during a time of political change for the US, Israel, and Iran, we see a new dynamic emerging. It is clear to even the most casual observer that DoD will not continue to use its force posture to deter Iranian aggression and limit Iran's freedom of maneuver. Also, the extent to which it will continue to build the capabilities and capacity of our partners to address Iran's malign activities has been significantly reduced. As a result, the U.S. has ceded a leadership role in response to Iran's aggression, particularly when it comes to working with allies and partners. And I will add at a critical time as well. Meanwhile, the unforgivable manner in which we ended our presence in Afghanistan has sent a clear message to Iran and its proxies that we are not only weak, but that we cannot be trusted to support or defend our allies. A very auspicious beginning for President Raisi. Thank you.
Simone, thank you for those opening remarks. And lastly, let's go to Marshall for your opening remarks.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
And appreciate the Iranian Americans for Liberty hosting this event. It's great to be here, to see you again, Ambassador Hoekstra. It was fantastic to work with you in your capacity as our ambassador to the Netherlands on illicit finance. I will just only make 2 points here at the outset. And the first point is that because of the Biden administration's actions, or I think more properly, their inactions, we are going to see Iranian state sponsorship of terrorism return to historic highs, if not new levels of violence. In particular, through inaction, the Biden administration has gifted a massive windfall in hard currency that the Iranians, and I'll talk more about this at length as you wish, but the Iranians will inevitably plow that money back into the Quds Force, back into Hezbollah, back into the Houthis, into Hamas, into the Shia militias in Iraq, into Bahrain. The list just goes on and on and on. We had the Iranian regime by the throat economically. They were engaging in significant cuts to their budgets, workarounds. Soleimani himself in his final days was little more than a bookkeeper trying to cobble dollars together to keep the terror apparatus running. Bizarre schemes where they commandeered oil shipments in joint operations with Hezbollah to sell to the Syrians and so on and so forth. The need to engage in that kind of financial engineering is over because the Biden administration has turned a blind eye to Iranian crude exports, and we are now seeing that the budget surplus they will run will again replenish the coffers of the terror apparatus. So I can elaborate on that as we go, but it's great to be with old friends, young friends, and Congresswoman Tenney, who carries the fight forward in the government, and look forward to answering questions.
Thank you to all of our esteemed panelists for your opening remarks. So we're going to jump right into the discussion now, and let me just set the room, set the conversation here. So we're here today to examine the potential expansion of the Iranian regime's sponsorship of terrorism under their new president, and in the wake of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, all signs point to more resources flowing from Tehran to their terrorist proxies as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, etc. And Iran's new president, who has been nicknamed the Butcher, is a hardliner. Make no mistakes, he's a hardliner. And he is currently under U.S. sanctions, as is almost every single member of his administration. They're either under U.S. or EU sanctions right now. So let's jump right into this conversation with our panelists. For our first question, we're going to start with the Congresswoman, and I'd like to get your perspective on why is President Biden continuing to engage with diplomacy with the Iranian regime?
Yeah, great question, and I'm sure we're going to look. Iran is masquerading as a legitimate state. It's been given the credibility of statehood by the UN, and so they have all the auspices of looking like a credible state, even though they're engaged in terror, they're engaged in intervening across state lines, across the Middle East, promoting terrorism. And I just find, the Biden administration continues to go to the old, it was the old information that we had for 40 years since the fall of the Ayatollah in 1979. I remember that as a high school student, actually. That's how far back I go. And that same 40 years of, if we just appease them, if we treat them like a normal state, they're going to act like a normal state, which that didn't work. And so I think what's really striking is that the Trump administration looked at something that foreign policy experts really poo-pooed and said this isn't going to happen, and said, no, wait a minute, maybe we should try the maximum pressure campaign, maybe we go and make deals with other nations around the world, like the Abraham Accords, and see if we can get many of the people who want to see peace and prosperity in the Middle East are willing to do partnerships with Israel and the U.S. so that their people can emerge out of poverty and see the kind of prosperity that was the potential that they could have. And so instead of doing, and the Trump administration made great strides there. Obviously, maximum pressure, taking out Soleimani, all those things were very helpful. So the Biden administration is doing what it does reflexively, because that's all Joe Biden really knows. Joe Biden has always, just sort of been able to never be held accountable as a almost 50-year politician with fairly easy races and never really having to worry about getting reelected or facing any real scrutiny, especially now. He's gone back to the old saw. Okay, let's just go back and appease them. Let's go back and see, whether we can make them feel like they're a state again and legitimized, and then therefore they will act like a legitimate state. Well, that's proven not to be true. And it's a failed policy that's going to fail, and we're seeing it's failing now in the Middle East. And so, that is about the only explanation that I can come up with for them, but they're continuing on their way. And as our guests pointed out in their opening remarks, that is only going to fuel them to do even more damage in the future and to go back to their old, their old regime of, especially under Raisi, we're going to see even more violence. We have this great culture, historically one of the most educated and more sophisticated, Middle Eastern countries on earth is, these people are trapped behind this situation, which is tragic, and which is why we're so supportive of all of you. And the fact that you are still, under this type of regime, and that I have a president portraying weakness and not understanding that our leverage was working. And now we really have no leverage. And so the Biden administration is going to try to backdoor its way into the JCPOA again, using sort of backdoor diplomacy, using people who have already tried this and have failed. And I'm concerned that we're gonna slug our way into that. And I'm hoping that the Biden administration doesn't do that, but I don't see any change. I think this is where we're going, the rules of the past instead of moving forward. I'm hoping and I'm hopeful that our allies and our economic and diplomatic partners will put pressure to understand that the Abraham Accords and the other normalization agreements are working. I know that, again, not to bring it up, but I know that Secretary Blinken indicated to me that they were going to strengthen the Abraham Accords and they're going to work in that direction. Doesn't really necessarily equate with going back into the JCPOA, so maybe we can deter them from getting back into that nuclear agreement and actually urge them, through our new partners in these normalization agreements to start projecting some strength. And not just projecting, but actually showing strength and standing up to their illegal interventions into these other Middle Eastern countries and in the region. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, Congresswoman, that as the president has projected this weakness, there's also been, in my opinion, really a vacuum of this American strength in the region. And of course, China, right on cue, has stepped in to fill this void. And I think it's something to the tune of a 20 or 30-year deal worth $40 billion is it? 400 billion, my apologies, that they're going to be pumping into Iran. Iran has never seen that kind of outside investment ever before. So that is certainly something to be concerned about. Congresswoman, thank you for those remarks. Let's go to Victoria. Victoria, same question. Why does this president continue to engage in diplomacy with this regime?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it goes to the heart of the structure of the original JCPOA. It's been my sort of private theory that it didn't actually matter what was in the deal. It was the fact of the deal and the way it was negotiated that was so magical for the Obama and now the Biden administrations. They loved the fact that this was an international coalition. We had the P5+1. The EU had a seat at the table, and the whole thing was ratified by the United Nations. It certainly wasn't passed as a treaty by the United States Senate, nor was it passed into law by both houses of the U.S. Congress, which is actually how the President of the United States and the people of the United States give our word. None of that happened. It all happened through international organizations. And I think it then became a kind of an article of faith of the way these folks envision the world, that if the United States steps back from a leadership role and makes ourselves the equals of everyone else and restrains our, whatever it is, imperial ambitions, whatever they don't like, that the world will become a better place. And as the Congresswoman said, the Iranians will somehow want to join this. They will want to be part of it. But of course, this is nonsense, and the Abraham Accords are the opposite of this. This is where there's very clear U.S. leadership that results in a concrete, specific deal that is very strongly supported by the U.S. people. Good luck.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for joining us. So I think that's a little appreciated aspect of the deal, that the structure of it is what they love so much. So when you say, why are you getting back into it? It's expiring, it's pointless, it's not worth the paper it's written on, they don't care. They just want to be in this structure. They want this to be the future of how we conduct foreign affairs.
Marshall, what are your thoughts on that?
The question of why the Biden administration seems so desperate to engage the Iranians in diplomatic dialogue, I think comes down to actually something we've seen now in spades with regard to the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. It is a complete lack of fortitude. This administration is run by a group of people who don't have what it takes to compel the Iranians to stop with the terrorism, to stop with the UAV exports, to stop with the ballistic missile acquisitions, to stop with the nuclear program, and they are desperate to talk in the absence of a willingness to compel. Secondly, as we've seen now time and again in the 9 months of this administration, these are also people who have absolutely no idea how to identify and then use leverage in negotiations. We saw that the first week of the Biden administration when they gave up to the Russians the 5-year unconditional extension of the New START treaty and extracted nothing for it. We saw that again in the case of Afghanistan with the Taliban, and we are seeing that again, yet again, in spades when it comes to the Iranians. At the same time, the Iranians understand that by simply waiting and dragging things out, two things are happening. One, they draw steadily closer to the bomb as they pursue the enrichment program that they've got. And secondly, their financial situation grows ever more strong, particularly as the Chinese are ramping up oil purchases. We had the Chinese down to less than 200,000 barrels per day of purchasing on the sly from the Iranians. The Chinese are now overtly purchasing 3 times that amount. Oh, by the way, when it comes to the price of oil per barrel, the Iranian budget for this year contemplated the sale of 650,000 barrels a day. With the Chinese alone, as I just said, they're at 600,000. They also priced the barrel of oil at $40 a barrel. WTI crude is trading today at $80 a barrel. So we are looking at a regime that understands that time is on their side. And this diplomacy effort of Special Envoy Malley is going nowhere.
Simone, what are your thoughts on this? This president just continues to go back to the same conversation with the regime. Why is that?
Well, what I'm seeing is an administration that doesn't have a reality-based view or understanding of the world. I think that it may sound like an extreme statement, but 9 months in, I think it's pretty clear that every sign to the contrary is being ignored. They're still extremely focused on going back to this JCPOA negotiating table when, again, every sign is that there's no party at the other side of the table, or if there is, they're not serious, or they're playing games, or they want more. Just the other day, one of the mouthpieces of the regime came out and said, the Biden administration has given us nothing. Why would we want to talk to them? But that's outrageous. That's outrageous. The Biden administration has ceded to every single request that at least we know about. So I think that's not reality-based, in my opinion. Another example of that certainly is how they dealt with the Taliban and our disastrous surrender in Afghanistan. Again, not a reality-based approach as we're learning. So I'm very concerned about what this means for the future because it's still, we're still in the first year of this administration. And so I think it highlights how important it is for representatives like Congresswoman Tenney to be sort of out front and aggressive and helping to navigate this situation for the United States, given where the administration is right now.
And fortunately, there is people like Congresswoman Tenney and a lot of her friends and colleagues that are fighting this good fight, and we're thankful to them for everything that they've been doing. Simone, let's stick with you for the next question here. The next round of questions is going to be specific to the expertise of each of these individuals that you see before you. So for Simone, let's start with you. From a Department of Defense perspective, DoD perspective, can you please address what appears to be an official Islamic Republic of Iran policy of deploying terrorist proxies both in the region and around the world? And is this practice unique to the Iranian regime, in your opinion?
It's certainly a policy. It's certainly, more successful than any other country's similar policy. There's no one I can think of who's actually looked at the map and looked at different countries and plotted to destabilize them one by one. And not for nothing, those countries are all surrounding Israel. For the most part. So I think that's sort of where we can begin to understand the answer to this question. But if we start, for example, in Yemen, a lot of people don't really understand the conflict there. It's been going on a long time. 6 years ago, the Houthis successfully overthrew the government of Yemen, who's now operating outside of Yemen. And they've been steadily making military progress. The reason for that military progress and those military successes is the training and equipment they've been receiving from Iran, from the IRGC, specifically IRGC Quds Force. And there's a ton of evidence to support this. When I was in my old job at the Defense Department, we were able to declassify a massive amount of information, including details of weapons that were seized from DAOs that were clearly coming from Iran to Yemen. So there's a ton of evidence for anyone who wants to pay attention. The sort of disheartening thing that we're sort of at a disheartening point right now because the conflict continues. The Houthis are winning. And the Biden administration has chosen to focus on Saudi Arabia as the problem. The Saudis are actually trying to push back the Houthis. And at points in time, we've been partnering with them, with the Saudi-led coalition. We've been providing them with training, with material, with intelligence to help improve their capabilities, reduce civilian casualties, which were a problem early on. But all of that has stopped now, and there's really nothing standing in the way of a complete Houthi military victory, unfortunately. It pains me to say that. So that's one example. Obviously, in Iraq, a place where I spent quite a bit of time, and members of my family as well in uniform, I think that we are facing a situation there where there are so many Iranian-backed militias of many names and flavors, and they change their names all the time. We've changed our posture there significantly, which I think is a good thing. But we could have a whole other session to discuss is Iraq rather an Iranian satellite at this point or not. I think, sadly, that's up for debate. With respect to Syria, Iran's malign activity has been a hugely destabilizing force in Syria. Iranian proxies, we have multiple there, including Hezbollah. They've fought to keep Bashar al-Assad in power. They've had significant Russian support for that. I think that in general, international opinion is moving towards normalizing with Syria and normalizing with the Assad regime, and so we'll see what happens there. But I don't predict anything good. But we can go on. We can talk about Hamas and Israel, Hamas and Gaza. Iran was certainly a major force behind the Gaza crisis that we saw earlier this year. So I don't want to take up, I could take up like another hour or two on this question, but yes, that's really where they're focused. And that's also why domestically, when you have, a COVID crisis that went unaddressed, when you have the level of starvation and suffering of the Iranian people, and they see all of the wealth of the country going into these efforts overseas, it's very motivating for those of us who want to sort of help and get the word out that this is a very unfortunate situation for the citizens of Iran.
And Simone, you mentioned the Houthis, and it's worth mentioning this, and Victoria and I have both personally been very vocal about this. The Houthi rebels were put on the State Department's FTO list towards the end of President Trump's presidency. One of Secretary Blinken's first actions was taking them then off of that list, I believe for humanitarian purposes. And over the last, 7 or 8 months, the Houthi rebels have continued to launch attacks all throughout the region. And Secretary Blinken is very quick to issue statements condemning them. But for some reason, he won't put them back on the FTO list. So it doesn't really make much sense there. But we'll continue the conversation here and switch to Marshall and talk about your area of expertise. As the former Assistant Secretary of Terror Financing, can you please talk a little bit more about how President Trump's maximum pressure campaign, including but not limited to economic sanctions, was working, and why President Biden should have continued forward with this approach?
Certainly. We've heard a number of falsehoods in the previous days. 3.5 trillion won't cost the American taxpayer a dime. Nobody suggested that I should keep 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. As we heard in testimony, that's not true yesterday from General McKenzie and General Milley. The two falsehoods that the Biden administration has promulgated regarding the maximum economic pressure campaign, the first was Robert Malley out spinning the lie that the terrorism-related sanctions we imposed on the Iranians were fabricated. Of course, these sanctions are built with evidentiary packages based on hard intelligence that is compiled and vetted by career investigators at the Office of Foreign Asset Control within the Treasury and by lawyers up and down the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Justice, and the NSC, because these sanctions are invariably contested in court and they have to stand up to the test. Eventually, Malley backed away from spinning that falsehood. But the other falsehood that they continue to promulgate is that the maximum economic pressure campaign wasn't working. And that is absolutely not the case. In just 2 short years, we slashed the Iranian GDP by 57%. We did that by sequentially targeting through sanctions and through a pressure campaign the key underpinnings of the Iranian economy, starting with crude oil exports, condensates, and petrochemicals, and then moving into other sectors such as copper and other metals exports. Our approach, my approach as the enforcer at the Treasury, was very straightforward. I wasn't there to negotiate with the Indian government or with the Chinese government or with any particular government. I was there to talk to their companies and to give them a very straightforward business proposition. If you want to continue to do business with Iran, this is your decision. But you as a company, you as a corporation, need to make an informed risk-benefit decision. Because if you do business with the Iranians in these sectors, you will not do business with the United States, and you will not be part of the U.S. financial system. Most companies saw the clear answer on the wall there when faced with that. And we saw in 1 year, from 2019 to 2020, we saw the Iranian balance of trade go from about a $6.1 billion surplus to a $3.5 billion deficit. And that, as I indicated, put a hole in the waterline of the Iranian budget. Soleimani was scrambling. The IRGC was facing significant cuts in its budget. So was the Ministry of Defense for its ballistic missile acquisition efforts. The Quds Force took a major hit. Hassan Nasrallah, who is the primary benefactor of funding from Soleimani, from the QF, getting roughly, we would say, around $700 million a year, was reduced to engaging in unseemly diplomatic telethons, fundraising telethons, kind of Jerry Lewis-style telethons, where people would call in and actually offer to donate the kidney of their first child if that would get Hezbollah the funding it needed. We saw significant effect on Hezbollah in particular, in the sense that they had to scale back payments for martyrs. They had to prioritize the martyr payments, which meant less free hospital services for the Hezbollah operatives. They had to engage in these wacky schemes, moving the Daria, Grace, and other oil tankers. If you remember that one, what a saga.
Chasing ships.
The capacity of the regime to engage in terror through bankrolling. And again, let's be clear. The QF would have you think that there's some kind of special operations force. They're not. They're paymasters. They write checks to the real terrorists, who are the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Hamas guys, the Houthis, and Hezbollah. As the Biden administration has turned now a blind eye to the sanctions enforcement, I talked a little bit about how China has surged its purchasing of crude oil. We are now dealing with a situation where the country was in a total tailspin. The rial, the Iranian currency, lost half its value in the 2 years of our pressure campaign. Inflation was above 40%. And for economists who understand hyperinflation, once you get into that high 50, 60% inflationary range, you're not coming back. We had them at that tipping point. But Biden's let them off the hook. And now the IMF is saying that they think their economy is going to grow by at least 3% next year. That windfall of additional funding will plug those holes that we put in the terror apparatus budgets. And it will do so at a time when groups like Hezbollah are operating in countries like Lebanon, where their economy is now, unlike it was in 2019, in complete free fall. So Hassan Nasrallah will have more walking around money, comparatively speaking, in the next few years than he's ever had before. And we will feel the consequences of that. You have to remember, neither the Iranians nor Hezbollah believe they have yet paid us back for Soleimani.
Sure wish you were still in the Treasury Department, Marshall. That's for sure. So for our next question, let's go to Victoria for a question that's right in your wheelhouse. And speaking of Soleimani, you were in the White House in January 2020 when President Trump ordered the strike on the IRGC, Quds Force head, Qasem Soleimani. If you don't mind, take us through that decision and how the Trump administration approached the IRGC more broadly as a terror group. And maybe as a side note, what was it like to be in the room when that happened?
Well, thanks, Brian. And obviously, Qasem Soleimani's name has come up several times today, and it was one of the most dramatic decisions of the Trump presidency when we had been enduring attack after attack from Tehran with the attacks on tankers in the spring of 2019 through the Abaqaiq on September 14th of that year, and then attacks on our people in Iraq, leading to the death of a contractor. And in every case, not Simone, but some of her colleagues would say, well, we can't really respond to this because it would be escalatory. And we can't control the escalatory cycle. So, Mr. President, we really don't have any options for you. And it would be, oh, well, there's nuclear war, and then but how about we choose diplomacy? And so the options were not attractive or accessible. And finally, the president, becoming very frustrated with this, said, I need some real options. And a range were developed. One of them was Soleimani. He obviously wanted to learn a lot about it, find out why this would be a good idea. We discussed the various other, both the legal rationale for it, but then also why other presidents had made different decisions. And finally, he decided the provocations were simply intolerable. And that's how the National Security Council functions. As Marshall indicated, there are various what we call equities. It's a horrible bureaucratic speak word, but so many people have equities in these things. Obviously, the State Department is going to want to know because they're going to need to alert their people, put their embassies on high alert, talk to our allies. The Defense Department has enormous equities in a situation like this. The intelligence community obviously is playing a major role. So the role then of the National Security Council is to bring all of those people together, make sure everybody is pulling in the same direction, and that they have as much clarity as we can give on the president's intention, which is what they are in office to execute. So Soleimani was really the most dramatic example of that from my perspective, and a very good example of presidential decision-making and execution to put a very, very clear line. And we've talked a lot about red lines over the last 10 years and what happens when people cross them or don't cross them. I mean, this was a bright, flashing red line that you all have gone too far. And the result was we did not see another major provocation out of Iran over the ensuing year. Now, I'm very concerned now because, as Marshall said, they have not managed to retaliate against us for that particular action. And I think a lot of it was that until January of this year, they didn't want it to happen again. They were shocked that we were able to pull that off. And I have nothing but just the greatest respect for both the intelligence and defense folks who pulled that off. It was amazing. And now we don't have that. So, it was incredible to be in the room. We were, in the situation where the president was down in Florida, but we were on the phone together. Then as now, Chairman Milley was on the line and kind of walking us through it as the hit took place. And then the really surreal thing is you then go back to your desk and then you wait for everyone to figure it out. And like everyone else, you're watching Twitter and you start to see, there was an explosion outside the airport. Was it this? Was it that? Was it a coalition strike? And then they start to figure it out. And the most dramatic thing we were discussing was the picture of Soleimani's hand with that very distinctive ring. That when we saw that come up on Twitter, that was real game changer. So it was a fascinating experience in terms of marshaling the interagency and executing a presidential decision that has had such ramifications. And then you see the absolute lack of that resolution, that ability to make a decision in the current administration. It's enormously concerning. Thank you.
Well, and thank you to you for being part of that. The world is most certainly a safer place with Qasem Soleimani not on this planet. So thank you to you and your team for being part of that. So we're nearing the end of today's program, and I would like to give each of the panelists the opportunity to provide some brief closing remarks on the topic of today's event, which is, will the Iranian regime increase their funding of terrorists around the world on President Biden's watch? The Congresswoman is not with us. Victoria, let's stick with you. Your closing remarks on that, please.
Well, I was very fortunate in the administration to get to wear a couple of different hats, as Marshall was, and I wanted to close by talking a little bit about my second hat, which was at the Energy Department as the Secretary's Senior Policy Advisor and Special Representative for the Middle East and North Africa, and getting to get some granularity on our energy posture during the Trump administration was fascinating because, of course, we had the American energy renaissance. And we were able to go to the Gulf and start conversations that we haven't had since 1980. The one good thing Jimmy Carter did in January of 1980 in his State of the Union address was declare the so-called Carter Doctrine, which is that the United States will ensure the free flow of energy in and out of the Gulf because we needed it. It was a vital national security interest. And if anyone's tracking what's happening in Europe right now, when you lose your energy security, you are in a world of hurt. Due to the American energy renaissance, we could go to the Gulf and say, look, yes, we have been ensuring this free passage for these many years, but at this point it's free passage to China. We don't need it anymore. So what might we be doing to partner together with you so that you can provide some of your own security. And this was vitally important after the Iranian terror attacks on Abu Qaq, as I mentioned, in September of 2019. The Saudis recovered very well from those, but it was a terribly concerning moment. And my great concern, when the point of all of this is, with our withdrawal and our perceived weakness during the Biden administration, I am deeply concerned that the Iranians are going to just delve into the broad world of energy terrorism to try to hold the world hostage. And, I will not cede to anyone on my interest in preserving a clean, healthy climate, and that's something the Department of Energy does a great deal of work on. But at the same time, we cannot put the American people's energy security at risk in the name of climate when we have actors like the Iranians who are clearly willing to take these actions. So that's a space I'm going to be watching particularly closely going forward. And thank you again, Brian, for being a wonderful partner. Thank you, Fred, for your support, and for everyone for participating today.
Thank you, Victoria, and I would be remiss if I didn't add and share with everyone that's here and watching that you have two very proud Philadelphians on this stage, being myself and Victoria. Our Eagles took a little bit of a beating over the weekend, but that's okay. We're going to rebound. And
More unpleasantness, Brian.
yeah, sorry. So, Victoria, thank you very much, and it's an honor to partner with you on this. Marshall, let's go to you for your closing remarks, please.
So a couple of thoughts. I was very interested in your answer to why you think the Biden administration so heavily gravitates towards international diplomacy. But the travesty here is that the reason there's a JCPOA is because Iran was violating the NPT and violating safeguards. We have a global treaty and we have an international organization that's designed to maintain safeguards to prevent countries from doing precisely what the Iranians are doing. And yet I see in fact, we see clear evidence that the United States, together with the UK and France, bizarrely, have refused to go forward at the Board of Governors to call out and to refer to the Security Council the Iranians. Not that that would actually do anything, but it is international diplomacy. It is the cornerstone of nuclear nonproliferation. And we are allowing the Iranians to violate their safeguards agreements with impunity at this stage. That's where the Biden administration needs to apply its diplomatic efforts. When this short-sighted effort fails with the Iranians, the good news is that the sanctions architecture we put in place is still there. Now and I'm going to come back to that, but there are some things that have changed for the worse and for the better. Things that have changed for the worst include the fact that the Iranians I mentioned some of these bizarre schemes of the Iranians. The Iranians have now embedded themselves deeply in our hemisphere into Venezuela. And the Biden administration is going to have to come to terms with that and is going to have to, as they're doing with the Iranians, they're also doing with the Venezuelans, which is turning a blind eye to the oil shipments and the exports. But whatever it is the Iranians are trading to the Venezuelans, I presume weaponry and I presume for gold, the Biden administration is going to have to bring that to an end. One of the Iranian generals who had a heart attack about 2 months ago, same guy who was furnishing ballistic missiles to the Houthis, had begun traveling routinely to Venezuela. Another thing that's changed for the worst is the effect that the Afghanistan withdrawal invariably has had on our Gulf partners. Our Gulf partners were shaken to the core by the Abu Qaq attack and greatly concerned about the staying power, even of the Trump administration, which they highly prize as a partner. I guarantee you their calculus on how to deal with the Iranians has been reshaped by how they've watched us retreat in defeat with casualty from Afghanistan. The good news is that we have the Abraham Accords. And we have an ability now on the part of Israel to, frankly, without the Biden administration, shore up the Gulf Arabs and keep the pressure on and do the things that will be necessary to do until our administration finds its way to a meaningful foreign policy approach. So I'll end my comments with where I started. The sanctions architecture is still there. The central bank of Iran is still under sanctions because, yes, Rob O'Malley, the central bank governor was directly funneling funds for terrorism purposes. We have the evidence. It's in the evidentiary package. That is a fact. The sanctions on oil are still there. The executive orders, the law of our land through executive orders is still in place, prohibiting any Americans from transacting and other countries from transacting in these commodities. And when this ill-fated effort does ultimately come to an end, I hope the Biden administration will swiftly return to an enforcement campaign, starting first and foremost with the Chinese. Thanks, Brian. Thanks again for having us. And Simone.
Marshall, thank you very much for being here. And I think I speak for a lot of Iranian Americans and probably a lot of Iranians inside of Iran when I say thank you for the work that you did when you were at the Treasury Department in freezing those assets and doing what you did to push that needle forward. So thank you very much. Simone, let's close with you, please.
Mindful that I'm the last person sitting between all of you and a swift exit, I'll keep my remarks brief. But I think there's a lot of bad news right now, and there's a lot to be depressed about. I would just say long term, I'm still very bullish on the United States. I think we certainly have a lot of work to do. And given what the current administration is doing, we need to really be prepared to help fix things when there's an opportunity. So, I look forward to working with you and all of you tuning in as well, in order to get our feet back on the ground as quickly as possible, and help turn the ship when the opportunity arises. So, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you, Simone. Join me, please, in a round of applause for all of our panelists. So in closing, I want to say thank you to the leadership of my organization for being here today and for everything that you have done to give me this opportunity to lead. I very much appreciate it. And thank you to the leadership of CSP for being here and for your partnership and for all the good work that you guys are doing as well. And thank you to our esteemed panelists for spending their time with us today, for offering your expertise on these issues, and thank you for your service to our nation, and I'm sure you will be called upon in the future. Thank you to Wesley, Jared, the whole CPI team if they're here. Thank you for your help. And to all of those in attendance for being here today, and to everyone watching, thank you very much for being here. Let me just close with this. The time is now for all Americans, not just Iranian Americans, all Americans, to start raising their voices in support of the people of Iran against the Iranian regime. There needs to be a clear distinction between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime will continue to foster terrorism, as we've heard today here from our panelists, and the Iranian people will continue forward in their fight for freedom, and we as Americans must be standing with them when that time comes. So thank you very much again for being here. To all of you, for everything that you do, thank you. Keep up the fight. Keep pushing forward. We're going to make a dent in this. So thank you again for being here.